Hi there. Shame can be used in many different ways, and tonight I'm going to talk about a especially nasty one: using shame to manipulate, control, and exploit other people. The idea here is that a person's sense of self-worth can be divided into two categories. We have innate self-worth, what you are worth as a human being, and your utility self-worth, what you are worth because you're useful to people. If you bully and shame a person, making them feel bad about themselves, they can be made to retreat into being useful, trying to make up for the fact that they even exist. This is a very real phenomenon. I have encountered it many times in many different ways, shape, and forms. And tonight I'm making a video response to episode number 2 and 3 of a series of YouTube videos made by Typhon Blue. I have already responded to the first video in the series. I'm going to link all 4 videos in the low bar, and I'm also going to link one of my old videos where I talk about one version of this shaming. In that particular case, it was about racism and sexism. How we can't just look at one or the other, they tend to interact with each other, just like all other oppressions. If we look only at one, we get a problem. And in this particular case, it's about people trying to shame people over racism in a sexist way, trying to manipulate people into sexual relationships or inside sexual relationships. It's titled "Racism is no excuse for sexism." To understand this phenomenon, let's have a look at who is doing it and who it is being done to. First of all, the distinction between individuals and categories and groups. It's always individuals who do things, but they can do it as a part of a group. However, categories do not have agency. Categories cannot do anything. I mean, if we have a specific gang of, for example, people of a certain skin color or gender, that gang can do something, but a skin color or a gender can't do anything. Skin colors, genders, other ways of categorizing people, they don't have agency. They can't do anything. However, shaming can be done to a category of people. Just like they don't have agency, they don't have any feelings either. A category of people as such cannot be hurt. However, people who identify with a category of people or are identified by others as part of a certain category, they have feelings and they can get hurt by shaming. We also have ideologies and related phenomena. When it comes to using shame against people, I think political ideologies such as liberalism and socialism are very similar to religious belief systems such as Christianity and Islam. They all have their stories to tell, with their good guys and their bad guys, with the people who should be proud and the people who should be ashamed of themselves. It's a very efficient tool to keep people in line. Ideologies are not monoliths, so we should be careful with how much we generalize. But it is reasonable to say that certain kinds of shaming are quite common within certain ideologies. For example, in Christianity, it's quite common to shame people for their sexuality, not just sexual minorities, but everyone. The idea that sexuality itself is sinful, and this shaming is used to tie people to the religious organizations, make them make amends for their sexuality, have them make themselves useful in their repentance for being human. This is quite nasty, actually, and I think it's not only oppression, but I really lack words for it. But it would be unfair to accuse all Christians of this, or to make it the main point of Christianity. I will now move on to feminism, because Typhon Blue is a member of the MRA movement, or at least appear to be in much of her rhetoric. She bring up quite a bit of shaming against men, and I think most of the shaming she bring up is real. Much far from everything, but quite a bit of the anti-male biases that the better of the MRAs bring up are real phenomena. However, they tend to try to stick it to feminism, which is rather absurd, because these biases against men are much older than feminism, most of them, and they are not advocated by feminism very much. So I call bullshit on that particular one. But yes, there are these biases against men, trying to force them into being useful. However, in these two videos, Typhon Blue paints a scenario where it looks as if it is the category women that does this thing to the category men. And like I said, categories don't have agency. So this is bullshit. And she also paints the picture that it must be one master group, one master category, and one oppressed category. This is a very common way of thinking in feminism, especially certain outdated forms of feminism, the one known as radical feminism, that really should go back to the 80s where it was actually useful, and radical feminism is dying in favor of more useful schools of thought. But much of the MRA movement has taken over and reused this idea of one gender oppressing the other. And I'm talking not about privilege here. I mean, privilege is real. And, well, I think there's much more male privilege than female privilege in society as large. But we do have both male and female privileges, and they should be dealt with. But there are certain kinds of structural oppressions, but that doesn't mean that one gender has agency and is doing stuff. It doesn't work that way. And the very basic thing here is that this whole system of shaming, it is not one-sided. It is not done in one direction. It is done by all kinds of people through all kinds of ideologies and arguments. Shaming as a means of exploitation is used not only by people who have power, but it's a very easy weapon to get your hands on when you don't have very much power. It is very often used by people who, rightfully or otherwise, consider themselves to be oppressed, trying to get the upper hand, trying to get something out of the situation, and painting yourself as the victim, as the abused party, is a very common part in this whole shaming. Typhon Blue herself explained this in the threat narratives videos that I have also talked about previously. And like I said, this is done in all kinds of directions. One good example would be the subculture of so-called pickup artists who make it their philosophy in life to put their own personal sexual gratification above everything else, pretty much taking a vow to not care who gets hurt in the process. As long as they get laid, who cares if they wreck the life of the person they fuck? And one of their main methods is this thing called negging, which is pretty much this awful thing that Typhon Blue describes. This whole thing of breaking someone down, attacking their innate self-worth, so they will be more vulnerable to usefulness. Make the girl feel insecure and then make it clear to her that she can be of use to you sexually, and she will feel that that's the only thing she's good for. Really creepy, really destructive, really inhumane. I'll make a separate video about that at some other point. But one of the nastiest things about shaming as exploitation is that it doesn't have to be us versus them. It is often done within groups. Very much about when you're trying to accomplish something together as a group, you tend to want to get something out of it yourself, but you want the other people in the group, well, not necessarily, of course, but it's easy for you to want the other people in the group to be selfless, preferably to the point of being self-destructive. You want them to give everything for the cause. You want them to sacrifice themselves. And how do you do that? Well, you attack their innate self-worth. We see this all the time within political movements, religious movements, all kinds of activism, all kinds of fighting for an idea of making the world a better place, which is really self-defeating, because that's not how you make anything better. You will just break people down, or at least make them bitter. And bitter people are not in a good position to build a better world. They are likely to turn dogmatic and spiteful, using the ideology as their excuse to get their bitterness out. It becomes a vicious circle. And I'm not talking about any specific ideology here. I'm talking about the problem that exists in all ideologies. It can be quite more common in specific groups than in others. I mean, two groups based on the same ideology can be very different from each other. One of them can be really healthy, and the other can be based on this shaming, where people drag each other down for the sake of the cause. That's one of the things we need to consider when we try to make something good. I think this is awfully common. So anyway, I find this subject really interesting. I'm looking forward to more videos on the subject by Typhon Blue and others. And this is all I have to say for now. Live long and prosper.